Well, listen, thank you everyone for attending this morning. We're here for accelerating supply chain decarbonisation. My name is Jasper Crone. I'm a director at CEN-ESG. We're a corporate sustainability consultancy. If you want to hear more about us, we're literally behind this curtain on the other side. But really, we're here to talk about the value chain or supply chain decarbonisation, which is really an incredibly material area for most companies to address within their sort of net zero programs. It's the largest, or at least maybe the second largest kind of area within corporate Scope 3 footprints. Definitely the largest if you don't really have any kind of energy using products that you're selling, and especially material for companies that make things or use things. So materials, food and beverage, retailers, construction, and the like. And obviously, it's also the hardest, widely acknowledged as the hardest part to tackle within a Scope 3. And we'll talk about various reasons why that perception's. Sorry, my mic's just dropped out. Why that. And again, oh no, there you go. And we'll talk about why that's the case. But also, I think it's obviously an area that some companies set explicit targets on within the context of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. One of the options that you can take from a Scope 3 perspective is setting a supplier engagement target. So it can be an explicit area for companies to focus. But we'll go through a number of kind of points, I think, on this panel, how the supply chain and decarbonisation dovetails into current and incoming regulation that is broader than just decarbonisation. We'll discuss some of the key challenges, as I said, and actually some of the barriers, but also talk about some of the successes, some of the sort of successful strategies that you can use, some of the kind of information sources, etc., and actually how potentially customers can be ignoring some of the activity that suppliers are already able to bring to the table in this area. And I think actually more broadly, we'll also discuss about kind of aspects that you can rely on within your value chain. And I think a lot of the kind of issues that people feel is that this area is outside of their control, but there are sort of network effects and forces coming to bear. Broadly speaking, all companies in net zero jurisdictions should be heading towards 2050. So, and I think collectively we are beginning to see that network effect taking place, whether it's through the flow of finance, whether it's through other people engaging with your suppliers, whether it's your transport providers, really beginning to kind of move collectively in the same direction. So I think one of the other messages is you're not alone, we are not alone, or one is not alone in this. And the chances are your suppliers are probably having the conversation multiple times with their customers. So I'll just stop there from the introduction perspective, but I'm joined by a brilliant panel whose roles and whose companies span the supply chain, in terms of their position, but also as well as practitioners who kind of overarch areas within data and within sort of strategic advice across industries, and broadly speaking can help companies navigate this area. So I'll hand over maybe Lisa to just introduce herself, introduce her company and role, and we'll go down the line and then we'll get stuck into questions.
Hi, I'm Lisa McLinden. I work for Spring Near East. We are a supply chain agent for the fashion industry with over 100 factories within our supply chain across men's, ladies, kids, woven jersey, knitwear. We act as a sourcing hub for short lead time production, and we supply to retailers such as Sainsbury's, John Lewis, Mint Velvet, Ralph Lauren, Nobody's Child, Finisterre, just to name a few.
Thanks. Anders?
Yeah, I guess our next, Anders Rosing is my name. I work for DSV, the third largest logistic company in the world. So we are represented in 80 countries, and we are an asset-light company. So when it comes to supply chain, of course, this is something that we have focused on, how our suppliers are working towards the same agenda as us. I work with sustainability, operational sustainability within the organization, which is basically making the plans for the company on how we're going to achieve our targets together with the business and operation.
Hi everyone, I'm Imogen Sparks. I work for Teck. Teck is a Canadian mining company. We produce copper, zinc and steel-making coal, and we're focused on the critical minerals needed for the energy transition.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Lina Hilwani. I work for KPMG. KPMG, as some of you will know, is one of the biggest auditing firms, but we also have management consulting, tax and legal services. My focus is I lead a lot of the work that we do around supply chain sustainability, decarbonisation, waste, energy, but also human rights issues. And the focus that I am going to bring today is, rather than the kind of whole range of services that you could imagine, is around the implementation. How do you implement this and how do you make it real in an organisation?
Morning everybody, my name is Ken Smith. I'm from Bureau Veritas, so 90,000 organisation, 140 countries, doing primarily safety, environment, quality compliance, but also sustainability understanding, regulation, and then primarily verification. So we're an independent organisation. We'll be helping companies understand, verify, make sure their data, their processes are actually working effectively to deliver the outcome.
Great, thanks everyone. Okay, well let's kick off, and maybe Lisa, from a kind of practitioner's point of view, maybe it's best to start is talking about some of the key challenges that companies face when they're thinking about decarbonisation of their supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say some of the main challenges that we experience at the moment is having the right data and that grade A data that's required for some of the calculations that you need to do to decarbonise, and especially with the legislation that's up and coming with regards to digital product passports. Companies are going to have to be ready for this in the next 2 years. So within our supply chain, we have factories that are fully vertical, dyeing, finishing, processing. They even manufacture the fabric within the one location. Great, that's excellent for getting that grade A data. But other manufacturers, they're outsourcing dyeing and finishing, embroideries happening elsewhere. They're having to get raw materials from another country. So really one of the biggest challenges is getting that data that's suitable for calculating those carbon emissions. And equally, what we find is a lot of the manpower that's required to get that data as well is a real key challenge.
Yeah, so there's definitely a kind of resource and capacity issue within supply chain. Imogen, I just wanted to jump to you on the same question. I mean, can you outline, from your perspective, key challenges that you see?
Yeah, so one of our key challenges, I would say, is access to technology. So in the mining industry, a lot of our mobile equipment is huge, and that we use that for transportation, etc. But currently the technology isn't available for large-scale operations. And because the technology also isn't available, it's difficult to invest in some of the energy technologies that we need behind it. So without the right technology, knowing what that'll look like, especially in 5 years' time, it's really difficult to get everything else moving alongside it.
Yeah, thank you. And Lina, from your position, sort of, overarching a number of industries, what are you picking up in terms of the same question?
Thank you. So I guess, I'll go through a few of the challenges that maybe we see across industry, but I do understand, obviously, there's definitely nuances when you talk about mining, when you talk about fashion, etc. But I think there are three main things that I think most organizations will struggle with. And one of them is absolutely the data, but also the methodology alignment. There is obviously the GHG protocol provides the excellent source of how do you calculate credibly, how do you ensure that you will get the assurance that is right. But there's obviously options within that. And a lot of organizations, I think, we kind of see two different levels. Organizations that have already decided to move to the deep end, the harder way of calculating, product level footprint, or product level or LCA, life cycle assessment kind of principles in the way they calculate carbon emissions in a supply chain, while others are still, again, requiring suppliers to provide data. They're looking at organizational level data. So I think for industry as well, for companies within the sector, it's incredibly hard to compare. Even if you are working in very similar supply chains, it's very hard then to collaborate because your numbers are different, your baseline is different, and your suppliers are providing slightly different things that don't align. So I think the data challenge, it also embedded, I think, within it is a methodology and kind of a little bit better guidance challenge from regulators, which we believe will come. I think the second point around this is obviously scale, the manpower to do it, but also the scale of the suppliers that you'd need to deal with or the actors that are outside of your own control. I think that translates into two things. One is the practical element. How do we do it? How do we have the people? How do we train the people? What are we asking for and for how long and how much does it cost? But I think because of that, it also makes it really hard to get senior buy-in. So this costs money, technology, as Imogen mentioned, also it requires investment, it requires training, it requires people's time that have day jobs as well. So I think to really actually get investment, you need to articulate this better and be really clear about what are we doing, why, what does it look like, and how much it costs. I think the third one is obviously the completely obvious elephant in the room is you're relying on third parties. You're relying on someone else to do something that will impact your numbers, you'll impact your performance, and you'll impact what you report at the end of the year, and that takes. I think that's a different suite of solutions that you kind of need to think about.
Yeah, I know you're absolutely right, and I think companies who are not getting data from their supply chain can take matters into their own hand, as you mentioned, and if you conduct your own life cycle based carbon assessments, maybe even only as an interim measure, but it does put the power back into your hands from an information perspective. You may find that you identify, quite often I should say, you identify levers that you can pull that you previously didn't really have visibility on. So where suppliers are located, which is a tough choice obviously to make if you're going to make that, but also what happens if you reduce the weight of certain items, what's more impactful than the other, and what if I swap out for this material for that, or this certain components for others, and I think if you have the ability and you hold the design pen, then you can take back some of the control that you of those issues that you previously thought you might not have. Ken, I did want to turn to you on the same question actually on the key challenges. I don't know if following that you've got anything you wanted to kind of add.
I think a number of the points have been raised. Where we see it from the data perspective is obviously from our perspective, our side is verifying, as people have said. So auditing in the countries, going to actually to the supplier, and then verifying that data. So there you see a huge amount of variability and understanding who or what organisation is defining the methodology that's within all of that. So there's a data collection, assessment, verification, and methodology piece. I think there's and Lina's touched upon it as well, but I think there's a complexity here which is around ownership. So when you move into the supply chain, and in the majority of cases, as you said at the beginning, Jasper, 80% of most organisations' carbon footprint is in the supply chain. So you're having to look into your supply chain as the next stage here. And there is a level of complexity in terms of who owns it. Is it finance? Is it procurement? Is it the sustainability officer? And is it a process engineering organisation? Who is enabling that process and system? So would you do it typically through the finance procurement systems to try and collect this data and to articulate and have a relationship with the supplier? And on the supplier side, I think as Lisa said as well, is it a sustainability officer? Is it a procurement officer on the supplier side? So I think it's a really interesting area which brings a lot of collaboration and innovation. But one of the main challenges is who is owning what to begin to start that journey in terms of data, process, ownership and clarity.
Yeah, no, I think that's also a really good point. And look, we've talked around the issues, which I think if you have looked into this area are fairly common to all. So maybe let's talk about strategies that we're seeing or employing that have had success. And Lisa, maybe I'll start with you, but also what can business do better in this area to facilitate suppliers or get a better understanding of what they're doing as well. So let's try and outline some kind of key success stories, I think, across the piece.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what we identified in the last few years is actually that a lot of companies aren't engaged enough with their supply chain, and there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in the supply chain that actually they can tap into. So we started running sustainability, circularity and net zero workshops for some of our retailers, and we had some really great success stories. So for instance, for Sainsbury's and John Lewis, we did a fantastic workshop on raw materials where we talked about regenerative cotton, what that does to the soil health in terms of the carbon capture that can have. Equally, hemp is a really cool fibre that you can get into some of your products. And then equally, we invited along some innovators. So there was an innovator we had called Evernew, and what they do is they take post-consumer waste cotton and they pulp it in the same way as you would a lyocell or a viscose. And so with that, you're getting a massive carbon saving from A, you're not cutting a single tree down to create your lyocell, and B, you're tackling that post-consumer, pre-consumer waste. So really what we wanted to do is show our clients actually you can tap into some of this innovation to achieve your net zero goals, and bringing that to the sort of forefront. And then another strategy that we helped to deliver in the workshop was around supply chain strategies. So for instance, we have a lot of solar powered factories within our value chain, and we did a comparison between a solar factory and a non-solar factory in the same region using the exact same product. And what we identified is that we had a 12% reduction per garment in carbon, which was incredible. So with that retailer, what we did was say, right, we've got 6 solar factories in your supply chain currently. Why don't we take up 25% of their capacity? And with that, we got better prices, a better service, and we delivered the carbon reduction that retailer needed. So these strategies don't necessarily need to cost you more. They can actually make you more efficient. So really, really hitting that home. And then the last point I'd like to make, which is something I'm very passionate about, is circularity. So using circular economies as a way to reduce your carbon. So think about your supply chain in terms of it's an ecosystem, it's not linear. Look to nature for those examples. It's a series of small circles that all intertwine, and making small, more informed reductions at each step of the process. So whether it's raw materials, dyeing and finishing, spinning, the production, and then logistics, then when it goes to the consumer, second-hand resale market. So making those little decisions at each stage of the circle is going to help you to come into your net zero.
Yeah, some great examples there, and I think I love the sort of win-wins that you outlined, and I think actually across a lot of businesses that we work with, those seem to be way more common than you would expect. I think, really framing net zero as a corporate-wide strategy actually kind of unlocks these things that have, that have already been scoped and already been kind of thought about, but never really had the sort of legitimacy or the kind of impetus to get going. And we find that, we find energy savings and carbon savings projects that are stacked in companies and very easy to bring to light. So they just needed a little bit of focus. Imogen, same thing from your perspective. I mean, in terms of successes and successful kind of strategies, maybe it's something that you want to talk about as well.
Yeah, so we actually have quite a similar strategy in terms of working with our customers to showcase best practice, showcase initiatives that have been working. So recently we've developed this more, and we have an integrated zinc and lead smelter up in British Columbia in Canada, and there we're piloting a carbon capture and storage facility there. We've been working with our customers, which does include a lot of refineries and large-scale smelters. So look, this technology works, this is how we're doing it, this is how we're implementing it, these are the savings that we're making, etc., 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 and trying to say you could do this too. So when it comes to knowledge sharing, working with our customers, we're trying to employ the same strategy essentially.
Yeah, great. And Lina, same question to you really. In terms of kind of examples of success and really move forward in this area.
Yeah, and I think, I'll apologise actually. This is going to sound a lot more consulting and boring, which is very hard to after the passion of Lisa and Imogen. But I think we kind of see the most successful solutions, and an example that I'll give actually is with the clients we've worked with across this whole area is firstly around the strategy, the methodology that you use, the baseline. Completely agree on the product level. And I think, your example is really around, it starts with product design. So you need to measure the carbon at that product level, and it cannot be, procurement is not the first place, suppliers are not the first place where you can change your carbon really. So I think what we're seeing is a lot more organizations, and we've been working with a global toy manufacturer for years, but the first thing was to do is this product life cycle footprint, the life cycle assessment or product level footprint, but light at scale. Life cycle assessments are expensive, they're time-stamped, they take a long time, and they're incredibly hard to change when your supply chain changes. So I think there are ways of doing that at a lighter level, at scale, to help you prioritize, to help you to focus. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen that. We're also working with a global beverage manufacturer who's also doing the same thing. Again, trying to crack down what is in that emission factor, where is the carbon intensity coming from for this material or for this product. Obviously, the focus here is on products and manufacturing. I think the second thing is just as a business is around process, and it's two levels. It's really around, you have to start with product design. So the decarbonization discussion is not, can I spend hours and hours and months and months trying to get 10% reduction from a supplier where you can probably achieve 30% by changing product, material and kind of choices. I think the second one is around functional level. Again, there are procurement organizations that we work with. They have 10,000 buyers globally. You cannot drive scale if you don't change the process that everyone uses across all the part of their procurement. So from supplier selection to onboarding to supplier relationship management to supplier performance. So I think that process, although it's the less glamorous side, is actually the scalable side of impact. And I think, just quickly, I guess the last one is around the supplier engagement and Imogen's example. I think a few things that we've, again, worked with one of the manufacturers around this is the tips to supplier engagement, which I think engagement is always an overused word in sustainability, but it has to have a senior tone to it. It has to say, from a CPO, from someone making decisions, this is going to be part of our considerations. It's not a stick, but it's clarity around what does that mean for our business. I think the other really good way of getting good engagement is clarity on the ask. It's all good and well to say to supplier, reduce your carbon, but if you actually tell them, I need you to choose your energy to renewable electricity in these locations because the tariff is no different, it becomes a different conversation. It becomes a conversation of when are you going to do it, and can you let me know, rather than can you reduce your carbon? It's a big problem. We all have data problems. We all have tech problems. So I think it's really about simplifying the messaging and actually tracking that. I think that the last piece is really tracking. Hammering down on suppliers. We work with a lot of procurement departments, and hammering requirements consistently without any measurement or monitoring, it actually dilutes the message, and you're not going to get a response. I think if you're really asking for something, make sure that you know how to track that at scale to the right level. Don't ask for data and don't do anything with it, for instance.
Yeah, and you can understand that's a frustration. I think there are lots of strategies that I think you can see that customers are taking with their supply chain. Some carrot and some stick, and some a mixture of both. And it is certainly ramping up. Historically, we saw companies just asking for data. It's now a question of achieving certain thresholds against, whether it's certain measures, whether it's sort of an EcoVadis score or a CDP score that really demonstrates a large amount of kind of corporate activity and achievement to basically be on the list. But on the flip side, we're also seeing, companies being more magnanimous, I suppose, with suppliers. Obviously, you're getting all their business, but also better, faster payment terms, which in some industries can be a huge benefit to suppliers, and quite a simple switch actually for customers to make. Not really taking too much skin off their nose, actually, to be honest. Ken, I just turning to you on this issue. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of raise on the success side?
I think there are some different industries here that we talked about, and I think the kind of fashion brand retail industry has been quite strong in this for a number of years, and I think the innovation, when you look at it from our perspective, which is generally we're auditing in the factories, looking at the data, making sure whether it's not only carbon, which is the primary today, but also the human rights is actually at the level that's expected. We see that collaboration is actually very strong in certain industries, and I think it's very, very significant. So I think learning from some of those and all the points that have been made, that engagement, that understanding, I think the point around data from auditing and where we're looking at assessment is, I think the point that Lina just made is, so what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? And actually, there are several industries where we're working with the clients on global supply chain audits, making sure, one, we integrate, wider ESG as well as carbon into that audit program. But two is, so what? So you've got a policy, you've started to implement that through the supply chain, but what are you going to start doing in terms of that data and that auditing outcome to make a change? So that's one of the things that we kind of constantly say to clients. You could spend an enormous amount of money on auditing to ensure compliance. Okay, fine. But what are you going to do with that will drive the change and the innovation? So that's the piece where I see a number of clients and industries beginning to work with, and as an independent organisation doing audit, that's what we're trying to drive a lot more, is use the data, change, and begin to do some of the collaboration and change that's seen in some of the sectors, to then start trying to change the way that procurement process and those audit outcomes are actually used within industry. So there's a number of good examples now.
Yeah, thanks. And Anders, I mean, within your sector, so within the sort of interactions that you're, that are coming into DSV, but also, from yourself out to your value chain partners, maybe also talk about those.
Yeah. I think, first of all, when you are such a huge organization, and I'm sitting in group, right, first of all, you need to engage with the countries, because we can't solve it all in 80 countries from the group level, right? So one of the things we implemented was the carbon fund, and basically it's all the countries that needs to pay into a fund, and then they can get their money back by applying for green initiatives, and that's basically going into the supply chain. It could be adding an electric truck together with a customer, or HVO and other technologies that are now starting to come into place. So that way we motivate and drive, you could say, locally some of the changes that we need to see, right? So with this, and we do that via our ambassador network. We have a global ambassador network where we drive the communication, and we have kind of like the engagement with the countries. So I think that's one important step. But also as part of our procurement, we of course have carrier engagement, meaning we are talking to our big carriers. We need to find out what commitments have they committed to, which one can actually have similar goals as us, and how do we actually measure the improvements. And I think we have come pretty far with those engagements with the bigger carriers, especially in Air and Sea, because we have three divisions within DSV. One is the road organization, the other one is Air and Sea, and the last one is our warehousing. And I think they are different approaches. That's also why we have outlined our roadmaps globally, to make sure that the organization knows how to kind of like engage in the different areas, because they are different approaches. The technologies, we talked about energy before. We also started up DSV Energy, where we are looking more into, how can we produce our own renewable energy? We have a lot of warehouses around the world, right? We also look into how the electrification coming up, all the electric trucks coming into our depots. How can we support that transition of our carriers, our supply chain, by making sure they get renewable energy when they need to charge the vans and the trucks and whatever needed to be charged in the future. So that whole transition we are kind of like embarking on together with our hauliers and etc. to make sure that we have a strong commitment there.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point. I mean, ultimately, this is actually one of those network effects that everyone can rely on. As large global carriers, reduce their footprint, reduce the footprint of the transportation of goods. Really, it's of benefit to all without really much requirement for us collectively to or individually to kind of concern ourselves with it. So it sounds terrible, but the point is that there are certain trends that we can rely on. So we collectively, when you think of your sort of net zero position in your plan, there's some things that you can automatically begin to factor in, and hearing from Anders here on transportation, I think is hugely important. Yeah. And similarly, Imogen, I mean, materials are right at the bottom of the value chain, if not all value chains, potentially all value chains. And the same sort of thing. What can we see coming through from your industry that also gives comfort, that underpins kind of the carbon footprints for essentially everything that comes from the materials sector?
Yeah, so like you said, we do sit at the bottom of a lot of supply chains. So the first thing that we've been trying to do for a number of years is obviously decarbonise our operations. Teck is currently one of the lowest carbon intensity miners for zinc, copper and steel-making coal. And we've been able to do this thanks to ample renewable power in close proximity to a lot of our mines, for example, hydropower in British Columbia. So that means that the raw materials that we're supplying into the supply chains already are low carbon, which has knock-on effects on the final product's overall carbon intensity. So we're obviously able to control our operations. But looking more into transportation, that's another huge source of our Scope 3 emissions, and that's an area that we're really trying to decarbonise. I've heard the word collaboration a lot on this panel, and last year we realised that a lot of industries in Canada were using the same transport link to Asia. So we set up a North Pacific Green Corridor Consortium, which is essentially a knowledge-sharing group of different industries, including bulk commodity producers like ourselves, railway transport providers, marine vessel owners and operators, port facilities and port authorities, as well as clean technologies, to pull together all of our knowledge to advance decarbonisations across this mutual transport link, explore new markets for low carbon fuels, and showcase how initiatives such as this could strengthen commercial partnerships, considering some of the companies within this consortium are customers and suppliers of ourselves. So it's been a really successful project so far, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And as you said, it's just really encouraging, and I think it's just another example that that everyone's kind of pulling together on the same thing. We've talked a lot, or touched on data a lot, and clearly that's a kind of collective impediment, the sharing of data, and the sort of systematization that is potentially required across businesses. Ken, maybe I'll talk to you. I mean, how do we see companies and supply chains using more data in the future, and what sort of information is out there? What sort of solutions are out there for companies to tap into to kind of overcome this kind of information barrier that we've been talking about?
So I think for me, there's probably three things within that. So I think one, many organisations, when we talk about data, many organisations forget that actually they may have a lot of data already within their organisation and the supply chain. Many organisations have management systems, ISO 14, be it 9000, where those systems and processes inside their organisations are already in place. And that drives an element of consistency in data already. I think secondly, then, when you look at data, I think when you look at Anders and also DSV, I mean, they are actually quite a shining light when it comes to this in terms of the key organisations in the supply chain, in this case in terms of transportation, that have also a lot of data and understanding. So I think that when you go into some of those key suppliers and understanding how you can actually link and look at that data together. So look at yourself first. You have a lot of the management systems and data there you have. Secondly, I think when you look at some of the major suppliers, and as been mentioned here, they're already quite well structured in terms of looking at the supply. Those tier one contractors and suppliers will already have a lot of that data already together. I think the challenge will then be in terms of the process and the understanding about how you can use that data, be it on a product level, life cycle, be it on a kind of granular level, or even, as Lina mentioned, kind of at a high level. I think in terms of, that classic, what they say, Pareto effect. Don't get sometimes I think people get a little bit hung up into going too far down deep into the data to make sure it's 100% accurate, because sometimes you can get lost. So I think understanding those key elements that will change the footprint or change the carbon or change the supply chain, focusing on those to begin with as those core data sources, I think is the start, rather than sometimes we go down deeper and deeper, which you can get a little bit lost in the middle of all of that data and get stuck.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And Anders, same question to you. I mean, you're the shining light, so I hear. In terms of the data kind of and information system approach, can you just talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in that area?
Yeah, but yes, I think we have done a lot when it comes, and we have a huge team around data, right? So, and it's actually quite a difficult landscape, you could say, right? But in our industry, we also have some standard tools that we use that can give you, it's called Eco-Transit, it gives you an average of an average, and all the carriers are putting data into it. And that's the way that we solve a lot of things right now, right? But of course, in the future, we want to be a lot smarter. So we want to have primary data. We know already that trucks can provide live data from the trucks, and we can get that data into our own landscape from the carriers. So of course, we need to talk to our carriers about, okay, what format can we get? Just like today, where we have EDIs with our customers that we are integrating in bookings and stuff like that. That needs to be, I think, in a couple of years' time from now, it will be something that we'll start exchanging like a lot of other data between suppliers and us. Because we are also suppliers of someone else who's our customers are also asking us about, okay, what are our emissions with your transportation, etc. So we are really, it's really an area where we are being pushed hard by our customers, which is then a good way to be even better, right? But it's also something that we really have a good foundation, but we also see there's a lot of technology that needs to come into play in the future that link us up with those primary data from the different suppliers, air, sea, and road, you could say. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely happening, but you're right. We're still collectively reliant on kind of averages. But Lina, I think from KPMG's perspective, maybe you just want to add on this same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the data and technology, I like that question together, because I think one of the things that we'll see, and I don't know if others will recognize this, is a lot of companies and a lot of the clients we work with as well, they're asking about the technology question. And actually, it's a data question. And the data question is, it's not about what technology is going to solve all my problems and give me all the data everywhere and, everyone's going to be great and have a great target. But I think it's about actually within the decarbonization space, again to Ken's point, is around understanding what data do I need and when, and versus what data do I want. So again, I think one of the things that we always kind of try and do very early on in the strategy side is size up your opportunity for reduction before you go to the hotspots. Some hotspots are not going to have lots of opportunities, or you're not going to have leverage. You might be a very small buyer in a very hard to abate sector. So actually, do you want to put your effort there? Where can you make a difference as an organization, and where does it align for you to actually get the business case that allows you to make a difference? So I think one thing around that is, again, be very clear about the data that you need versus the data that you want. Where can you be comfortable with averages? Where are you comfortable with imperfect data? That's really key, because then that drives what do I do next. I think part of that as well, what quality of data do I need and when? You might not need very high quality for hotspotting, but you certainly would need better data if you're looking at specific carbon and specific commodities. So I think, again, understanding the level of accuracy and the level of dependency that you have on data in different parts of the process are important, because if you slap on almost kind of standardized requirement, we need all the data at a very high quality across the whole value chain, that's expensive and actually quite impossible in certain areas in the world. And I think the third point just around that is just being creative with sources. We talked about methodologies and places to look at. We talked about suppliers, but actually there are one of the companies that we worked with, manufacturing, and they have lots of manufacturing facilities in Asia Pacific. Very difficult to get lots of the energy data. But what you can do is that we've done a lot of work around the study around the energy mix in different countries and the energy intensity of the supplier you're sourcing from, about that industry. Because then that, again, you're not relying on data and then questioning whether this data is accurate enough for me to make decisions. You're actually working on base macro level data that is reliable, and it will give you a flavor of, okay, is this in the top 20% or is it in the kind of 40% priority in terms of opportunity and hotspot? I think really quickly, just on the technology side, the technology question follows the data question. You know what you need, you know what level it is, etc. But again, we'd look at it in different ways. Traceability technology is a huge enabler to get better carbon data, but also to get better human rights data and get lots of things. So I think the traceability technologies certainly have come a long way. There's obviously also lots of technologies around supplier engagement, platforms that help you engage at scale. So you don't hire a lot of people, but you actually have a good way of back and forth information exchange, engagement, more follow-up, etc. But I guess also to go to your point a little bit, Anders, around more technology, and then I'll say the word AI, which I know you'll raise a few eyebrows, but there are quite a lot of technology around AI-assisted better planning. And what it means is it's more efficient. It doesn't mean it's a completely different way of decarbonizing. It just means that, for example, one of the technologies we're working with is around AI-assisted live route planning that not only looks at cost but also at carbon in Australia, the client in Australia. So I think there is a range of things to look at. But again, if you don't have your data problem clear, the technology world can be very confusing and very big and expensive.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. I mean, when I look at maybe the ideal world, and potentially it's always going to be an ideal, is that really every shipment, everything that you take in, every batch of goods, is associated with its own carbon footprint, with its own kind of materials footprint, from all the way through the supply chain. Ultimately, when you look at carbon footprints, they are cumulative. So, as they pass through various processing and various kind of transportation routes, the footprint's just increasing. But at each junction, if it's tracked and measured and reported, then as it comes to you, you'll have that complete picture. And it's certainly the way that some regulation is heading. Already within the context of Europe, you're having to look at at the carbon border. If anyone knows the carbon border adjustment or the European deforestation regulation, each one of those is working on a per shipment basis. So there is already an existing requirement in certain jurisdictions that marries up to that need to have that high degree of visibility. So it certainly looks like potentially that's the way we're heading, and that's ultimately will provide carbon footprints to customers as you sell products, which if you're confident about your process and practices, can actually be a good thing. So hopefully. I just talked about the big R word, regulation, which is a subject dear to my heart. So we can't really talk about anything in sustainability without regulation these days. How, Lisa, maybe the question to you. We've obviously talked about decarbonisation. How's that sort of fitting in with all of the acronyms, actually largely from Europe? But we have CSRD, we have CSDDD. As I mentioned, we have the carbon border adjustment, we have the deforestation regulations as well. So within the context of all of that, how's the sort of practical decarbonisation story fitting in within that kind of framework?
So in terms of deforestation within the fashion industry, unless you work in the industry, you might not realise a lot of viscoses and lyocells. The byproduct is wood pulp. So obviously you have to cut trees in order to get that into your supply chain. And so there's an NGO called Canopy, and they work with retailers and suppliers on their strategies to ensure that ancient and endangered forests aren't going into your supply chain. And I think you'd probably be quite surprised at the amount of ancient and endangered forests that are going into making packaging, making clothes, etc. So really making sure that within your supply chain you're not having that in there, and regulating, making sure that you have certification. So whether it's eco-vero lensing or whether you're using one of the innovators that I mentioned earlier for like a next gen material is a really good way of making sure you're going to conform to that legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And really we're talking about sort of traceability back to, in some cases, in the case of deforestation regulation, you're actually having to look right back to the plots under which your materials were grown, which is a really tall ask, especially if you're 3 or 4 steps down the chain. If you've made a table based off someone who's imported wood, then you have to figure out where that wood came from, which is pretty challenging. But yeah, thank you. And maybe also Ken, on the same topic of kind of regulation. Do you want to kind of talk about that?
So on the one side, I think the regulation is driving a level of consistency and understanding. So I think in some ways that's good. I think the word that's used frequently within the regulation is about materiality, so is significance. I think there is a little bit of a danger that we go into a compliance regime that is collecting vast quantities of data. Like we said before, whether you're using it or not, it becomes almost like a complex game of numbers, as opposed to actually understanding at the end of the day, what's the point? The point is to make a change and to make innovation and to drive sustainability. But those regulations are making a huge difference. Not only, as you say, within Europe, because it's all coming primarily from Europe, but it's across the world because everybody's importing and exporting in and out of Europe. So I think it's a huge change that's coming. I think pragmatism is very important, and materiality within all of this. And the points that we've made before around, be it with carbon or be it with some of the other data, look at where the primary impacts are, work on those, and understand through the supply chain how those regulations will affect and will come through that. And this, in the end, comes back into engaging, because whether it's EUDR deforestation, which is very complex to a certain extent, whether it's the triple D in terms of supply chain, this is going to push engagement. And I think whether it's a tech that will support that engagement, or I think, as Lisa mentioned, there are a lot of natural solutions that are being stimulated through these regulations and thinking, which is actually a really good thing to see. They may be small, but when you add those small pieces and scale up, they become very significant. But actually, more natural-based thinking rather than just always tech. There's a lot of solutions that are coming through at the moment, which in terms of EUDR and other forms of regulation is going to be a real change.
Yeah. And Lina, same question to you really around regulation and and the impact, both sort of product level and company level.
Yes, thank you. So I think actually quite a few points I completely agree with everything that is mentioned. Maybe just something else that I think the regulation is incredibly welcome, because it's raising the profile of lots of these issues internally within organizations, and it then goes to senior management attention. It translates into investment, and it translates into programs that are going to be sustained over the longer period. So I think from a kind of a governance perspective within organizations, it's incredibly welcome, primarily because of these reasons. So some of the work that we're doing, and some of my colleagues actually working in this area, you kind of had the plans and it's all ready to go, and you have real clarity about what needs to be done. But it's only now that you're getting the kind of internal license to do it because the regulation says so. So I think while if you kind of on the sustainability impact side, or you're on the kind of business case side, it's good news. It's good news because you're going to be running business better, but you're also going to be achieving sustainability at a better pace that has, spend dedicated to it. Regulatory compliance is non-discretionary spend for most organizations, and that's, I think, is important to raise the profile of sustainability.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm just going to open it up. Thanks to everyone on the panel. I'm going to open it up to Q&A, but before I do, maybe just to summarize, I think we've obviously heard from players across the value chain, but this is a complex area. It is tough to challenge, to tackle in the long term. But I think the message that we want to leave with is there's actually quite a few things that are in your hands that you can certainly rely on. As I talked about, there's sort of industry trends that have got your back. We talk about the decarbonisation, of all businesses that are underneath you. It's happening really without you doing anything. Firstly, obviously, supply chains are doing the same. The same is true of national electrical grids, which are delivering actually probably one of the largest success stories in global decarbonisation, and will support your suppliers as much as they support you. So that's kind of point one. Point two, I think we talked about materiality. About sort of zeroing in on the areas that you, at a high level first, that are obviously impactful for you. Lina talked about, there's no point in doing, totally detailed kind of analysis on everything. Zero in on what's important first. And once you've done that, you can undertake a more technical analysis, and that should throw up levers that are actually within your control. If you have a kind of design element within your business, you will identify things that you can do without necessarily talking about it going into that sort of collaborative element. And then there is, obviously a large engagement piece, a large data piece, a large information sharing piece. But I think that there's certainly 3 or 4 areas that companies can approach to undertake this area. So I'm going to sort of hold up there. I'm not sure how Q&A works. Do I hand the microphone to somebody, or? But I'll throw open the panel. Clearly, I'm not speaking.
Hello, thank you very much. Tobias Burke from Energy UK. You mentioned a few times during this panel, everybody, the importance of the methodologies when it comes to actually calculating life cycle emissions and sustainability, as well as not just the methodology, but also actually what is qualified as actually valid data or relevant data. I wonder what the panel's opinion is on one of the barriers to actually allowing for the consistency across companies as well as across borders to actually enable some of the increased usage actually and increased engagement from business in sustainability is the fact that a lot of the different actors and companies that actually develop these methodologies and develop these approaches are effectively in competition with each other and have no actual interest in actually developing these minimum level standards that companies can just go and say, okay, well, this is how we actually go about assessing the sustainability of our supply chain.
Shall I start off with that one? So I think there are 2 points in there. I think one is about methodology, and I think whether it's the various standards within the ISO series and looking at those in terms of life cycle, carbon calculation, the 18 dimensions, I think there is methodology and standardization that is moving through. So I think the methodology is one of consistency, which I think is probably kind of tick okay. I think your second point, which I think is the really valid point, is then everybody's collecting their own data. Everybody's got it within, SEMA Pro, various other software tools, bespoke lifecycle tools, in-house tools. And so then, the data's then within a closed field. So I think that movement, which is coming, there are open source data field. There are open source, especially within Europe, there are open source data. But I think that is where the movement needs to go, because otherwise we are all collecting different pieces of the jigsaw in a standardized way, but then not using the power of that data to understand through the supply chain through an open source. So that open source is coming and is in place in many places, but I think, the sharing of data is potentially a bit of a barrier here, where we're trying to connect as an independent, usually verifier, is trying to connect different data sources or industry-based kind of databases, etc., which are also there. So it is an issue, I take it.
Yeah, I think maybe to answer your question, I completely agree. I think the problem is the business of emission factors is very privatized at the moment, and that's the challenge. I actually think that the regulation is going to be the welcome into this conversation. So within, the CBAM requirements, the European Commission is meant to be, there is the average factors that are being used now, but this needs to be refined over time, and it will be refined. So I think this is absolutely coming. The difficulty currently that you'd have even within those emission factor databases. So for example, some of the work we've done is actually looking at what is the right emission factor from which database for this product, because what they include as part of the value chain calculation. So it's probably partly because it's very accurate, so the accuracy of it kind of killed its practicality a little bit in places, because you really need to know the detail, and actually you need an expert to look at that detail to understand, am I getting emission factor 1 or emission factor 2, and what does that impact on my cotton, for example. But I do think that we will see a little bit more standardization. We will be seeing regional level emission factors. I think there is no escape if you're really ambitious around some of the the decarbonisation you're doing, and you are spending a lot of time with certain suppliers, then you really want to have your own supplier level emission factors or your own kind of emission factor for certain commodities, because then you are capturing what you're doing that is different than the averages of averages. So I think it's just something to think about. And then again, where do you spend that money, where the priority is, where you have leverage, where it's really key for your business.
Great. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Anzal from ACT Group. Actually, Jasper, also very nice to see you up on the stage. So my question was actually specifically for the whole panel, really, on the topic around low carbon products and low carbon raw materials. So, of course, as Imogen said, one of the first steps to this is energy transition, so switching to biomethane or renewable energy or biofuels. So this is the space that we work in, but one of the main, let's say, barriers that we receive from the company side is that they're very happy to make their product low carbon. They're happy to look at a low carbon chemical line, but they have a challenge with then being able to market it to the company that they're purchasing from and make that then commercially viable. So how would you, or I guess what is the panel's opinion on whether there needs to be more legislation to encourage this, or whether the responsibility actually falls on the buying company's side to encourage more of their suppliers to invest in lower carbon production?
Yeah, Imogen, I don't know if you wanted to, we talked about this a little bit just in the breakout room. I don't know if you want to kind of lead on there.
Yeah, so it's actually a huge topic that's been talked about at every single mining conference I've been to recently. It's all about, is there going to be a green premium? And it's difficult to comment on it because it's still quite a new concept. But essentially at the moment, the answer is no. At the moment. The argument is everyone should be reaching these standards. There shouldn't really be that much of an incentive. If we start raising the barriers and we expect everyone else to have similar standards, then everyone should be moving up together. And rather than having an incentive just to become the product of choice, so we will choose this company over this one because they have all of their data in order, it's easy to comply with, for example, CSRD. In terms of looking at scope 3, that also reduces. So rather than having a premium, I think there's just going to be a bit more of consumer selectiveness over which products will be bought, essentially.
Yeah, and Lisa, are you seeing any of that activity within your sector?
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to talk about at the raw materials stage in terms of innovation. So what we're seeing is a lot of innovators are doing a lot of really hard work at the moment. A lot of retailers are doing amazing pilots, learning fantastic lessons, but actually the investment to these innovators so that they can scale it isn't at a level where you can actually take that into volume. So what I would say is actually the onus needs to be on the companies to give longer term plans and give forecasts so that these innovators can get the investment they need to scale.
Yeah. Interesting. Anders, I don't know if it's happening in the transportation sector, if you're seeing differentiated pricing there.
I would say yes. We have had sustainable fuels on our shelves for a long time, right? So that's something that we can offer our customers if they want to reduce the emissions. Of course, that comes with a premium price because it is something that is more expensive than how we transport things right now. So that's definitely something. But I think, we were talking about regulations. I think regulations in some of, at least, areas of our business will need to push the industry right in the right direction. But there's definitely a lot of things going on with the bigger carriers that are also pointing at the right directions in the industry. So, but right now it is a premium.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, listen. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we need to end it there. Any further questions for myself or the panel? We are all on the app and contactable through that, or else just try and doorstop us as we leave the stage. But thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.